HM Prison Leicester is a historic correctional institution located in the city of Leicester, within the county of Leicestershire, England. Established during the Victorian era in the 19th century, it stands as a physical reminder of Britain's long-standing penal traditions. Its imposing red brick facade, high perimeter walls, and narrow windows reflect the architectural philosophy of the time: security, surveillance, and strict discipline above all else. Constructed during a period when prison reform was beginning to take shape in Britain, the facility was influenced by Victorian ideals of order and moral correction. The design emphasized separation, silence, and routine, aiming to instill discipline through structure and isolation. This approach mirrored broader 19th-century beliefs that crime could be reduced through rigid control and enforced reflection. Situated close to Leicester's city centre, the prison occupies a compact urban site. Unlike modern prisons built on large rural estates, HM Prison Leicester is tightly enclosed within the surrounding community. Its location reflects historical patterns of prison construction, where accessibility to courts and local authorities was prioritized over expansion potential. As a local prison, HM Prison Leicester primarily serves the surrounding courts by holding adult male prisoners, including those on remand and those serving short sentences. Its role in the regional justice system makes it a key facility within Leicestershire, processing individuals at various stages of the legal process. This function creates a constantly changing population, contributing to operational complexity. The Victorian architecture defines much of the prison's internal layout. Narrow landings, stacked wings, and small cells characterize the structure. While these features once symbolized modern correctional thinking, today they present logistical and operational challenges. The original layout was never intended to accommodate the demands of contemporary prison management. Historically, prisons like HM Prison Leicester were designed with punishment and deterrence as primary goals. Rehabilitation was secondary, often limited to religious instruction or hard labor. Over time, however, the philosophy of incarceration evolved. Modern expectations now include education, vocational training, and mental health support, functions that require space and infrastructure far beyond what Victorian planners envisioned. The prison's heritage status also adds another layer of complexity. As an aging institution with historic characteristics, structural modifications must often balance preservation with modernization. Maintaining safety and compliance within an old building demands continuous adaptation and investment, particularly as standards for prisoner welfare and human rights have advanced significantly since the 1800s. Despite being over a century old, HM Prison Leicester remains operational in the modern criminal justice system. It bridges two eras, Victorian penal history and contemporary correctional policy, standing as a living example of how historical institutions continue to function within today's legal and social framework. HM Prison Leicester was constructed during the 19th century, a time when Britain was experiencing significant social, economic, and industrial change. The Industrial Revolution had transformed urban centres, creating both wealth and social challenges. Rising crime rates in rapidly expanding towns prompted the government to invest in purpose-built prisons, and Leicester was chosen as a strategic location to manage offenders in the Midlands region. The red brick architecture was typical of the period, chosen for its durability, cost-effectiveness, and symbolic solidity. The use of red brick was more than just an aesthetic choice. It reflected Victorian ideals of permanence and authority. In an era without modern steel and concrete, bricks offered structural strength and fire resistance, which were critical considerations for public buildings. The prison's walls, built from deep red bricks, conveyed a sense of solemnity and permanence, projecting the power of the state and the seriousness of incarceration. Victorian prison architecture also emphasized functionality alongside symbolism. The layout of HM Prison Leicester was carefully planned to maximize supervision and control. Cells were arranged in linear wings with central corridors, enabling officers to monitor multiple prisoners efficiently. The high ceilings, narrow windows, and thick walls were designed to restrict communication between inmates, reduce escape opportunities, and maintain order within the institution. In addition to its functional role, the red brick facade of HM Prison Leicester has become an iconic visual identifier for the city. The building stands out among Leicester's more modern structures, a reminder of the historical roots of the region's penal system. Its distinctive appearance also signals its purpose to the public, serving as both a deterrent and a civic landmark. The prison's architectural design incorporated the Victorian philosophy of panopticism, inspired by Jeremy Bentham's ideas of surveillance. While HM Prison Leicester is not a perfect panopticon, the arrangement of cells, exercise yards, and observation points reflects the belief that constant supervision would promote order and reform. Red brick was used not only for its durability, but also to provide a uniform, imposing visual presence that reinforced authority. Internally, the red brick construction influenced the prison environment in subtle ways. Thick walls provided insulation but also limited ventilation, which was acceptable by Victorian standards, but now presents challenges for modern prisoner comfort. The robust brickwork allowed for narrow corridors and stacked cell blocks, which were essential for controlling the population within the prison's limited footprint. The exterior's red brick design was complemented by wrought iron gates, heavy timber doors, and stone detailing around windows and entrances. These elements not only reinforced security, but also reflected the Victorian attention to craftsmanship and detail, blending utility with architectural expression. Over time, this combination of brick and iron has made HM Prison Leicester a visually recognizable and historically significant institution. Finally, the 19th century red brick architecture serves as a constant reminder of the era's penal philosophy. While modern prison design prioritizes rehabilitation, flexibility, and prisoner welfare, HM Prison Leicester's brickwork embodies an older approach, one centered on confinement, deterrence, and social control. The building itself tells a story of Victorian societal values, reflecting the tensions between punishment and reform that have shaped the prison system over more than a century. HM Prison Leicester, like many Victorian-era prisons, was conceived primarily as a facility for containment rather than rehabilitation. The 19th century penal philosophy emphasized punishment and deterrence, reflecting societal beliefs that strict discipline and isolation would correct criminal behavior. The architecture, operational routines, and policies were all geared toward controlling prisoners physically and psychologically, rather than preparing them for reintegration into society. Cells in HM Prison Leicester were deliberately small and austere, designed to isolate inmates and minimize interaction. Each prisoner had very limited personal space, which served both to restrict movement and to enforce a sense of discipline. Privacy was almost non-existent, and the bare interior, typically a simple bed, a wash basin, and minimal furnishings, reflected the belief that comfort could undermine the moral corrective purpose of incarceration. The routines imposed on prisoners reinforced the focus on containment. Daily schedules were rigid and repetitive, involving periods of lockup, labor, and limited exercise. Hard labor, such as working in prison workshops or performing maintenance tasks, was central to the Victorian penal system. These activities were not intended to teach new skills or prepare inmates for employment. Instead, they served as both punishment and a method to instill obedience. Separation and silence were additional tools for control. Inmates were often prevented from speaking to one another, and communal areas were tightly regulated. The Victorian authorities believed that isolating offenders would reduce the spread of criminal influence and encourage reflection on their misdeeds. However, this approach largely ignored the social and psychological needs of prisoners, creating conditions that could exacerbate mental health issues rather than alleviate them. The prison's focus on containment also extended to security measures. Thick walls, iron-barred windows, and reinforced doors were designed to prevent escape and assert state authority. Guard towers, central observation points, and strict supervision routines prioritized control over rehabilitation. These features, while effective for confinement, left little room for educational programs or counseling services that are central to modern correctional philosophies. Even the categorization of prisoners reflected the containment-first mindset. Classification was primarily about risk management and order within the prison, rather than individualized rehabilitation plans. High-risk offenders were segregated to minimize disruption, but all prisoners were treated largely as passive recipients of discipline rather than participants in their own moral or social development. Over time, the limitations of this containment-focused design have become increasingly apparent. Modern criminology emphasizes rehabilitation, mental health support, and skill development as essential tools for reducing reoffending. Yet, the physical layout and original philosophy of HM Prison Leicester make implementing these measures challenging. Small cells, narrow corridors, and limited communal spaces restrict program delivery and interaction between staff and prisoners. Ultimately, HM Prison Leicester stands as a tangible reminder of an era when prisons were built to confine rather than to reform. Its design reflects the Victorian mindset that strict punishment and isolation were sufficient to control criminal behavior. This historical context helps explain both the structural challenges the prison faces today and the ongoing struggle to balance security with modern rehabilitative goals. HM Prison Leicester, originally designed to hold a modest number of inmates, now faces severe overcrowding, a challenge common across the UK prison system. The Victorian-era design anticipated far fewer prisoners than are currently housed, creating pressure on cells, communal areas, and staff. Overcrowding amplifies existing structural limitations, as spaces meant for single occupancy often hold 2 or more inmates, increasing tension and stress levels among prisoners. The overcrowding issue affects every aspect of prison life. Cells built for 1 inmate become cramped when occupied by 2 or more, limiting personal space and privacy. Shared facilities, such as showers, toilets, and dining areas, become overcrowded, resulting in longer waiting times and reduced access. This congestion can lead to disputes among inmates and heightens the risk of violent incidents within confined spaces. Overcrowding also strains the prison's operational capacity. Staff are required to supervise larger numbers of inmates than originally planned, making monitoring more difficult and reducing the effectiveness of security measures. Routine activities, such as movement between wings, recreation periods, and meal distribution, become more complex and time-consuming, requiring additional coordination and vigilance from prison officers. The mental health impact of overcrowding is profound. Inmates in cramped conditions often experience increased anxiety, depression, and frustration. The lack of personal space and inability to escape crowded communal areas can intensify feelings of stress, sometimes leading to self-harm or aggressive behavior. Mental health support services are often overburdened, making it difficult to address these issues adequately. Educational and rehabilitative programs are also affected by overcrowding. Classrooms, workshops, and training facilities have limited capacity, so not all prisoners can participate. This restriction reduces opportunities for skill building, education, and structured activity, components critical for reducing reoffending. As a result, the prison struggles to meet modern rehabilitative goals while simply managing day-to-day containment. Overcrowding also creates a feedback loop that affects safety. When cells and communal areas are overpopulated, the risk of violence, bullying, and contraband circulation rises. Prison officers face greater challenges maintaining order, and resources are stretched thin. Every additional inmate increases the likelihood of conflicts, undermining both security and the overall well-being of prisoners and staff. Factors contributing to overcrowding at HM Prison Leicester include rising incarceration rates, short-term remand populations, and delays in court processing. Many offenders serving short sentences cycle in and out of the facility, further exacerbating congestion. Additionally, National sentencing policies and limited availability of alternative correctional programs contribute to higher inmate numbers than the prison was originally designed to accommodate. Addressing overcrowding is an ongoing struggle. While temporary measures, such as double occupancy of cells and reallocation of resources, provide short-term relief, long-term solutions require systemic changes. Expanding infrastructure, improving prisoner flow through the justice system, and investing in alternative sentencing programs are essential to reduce population pressure and create safer, more humane conditions. One of the most pressing consequences of overcrowding at HM Prison Leicester is that cells originally designed for a single prisoner are frequently doubled up, creating a host of logistical, security, and welfare challenges. Victorian-era cells were compact, often measuring just enough to accommodate a bed, a small wash basin, and minimal personal space. When two prisoners are placed in these confined quarters, the space becomes extremely limited, leading to physical discomfort and tension between cellmates. The practice of double occupancy affects daily routines significantly. Personal belongings must be shared or stored in very limited spaces, which can cause frustration and disputes. Sleep schedules may conflict, as one inmate's movements or habits disturb the other. Even basic hygiene can become problematic when two individuals must share a small wash area and limited ventilation. This lack of privacy is mentally and emotionally taxing and can exacerbate stress and anxiety. Double occupancy also increases the potential for conflict and violence. When two people are confined in a small space for extended periods, tempers can flare over even minor disagreements. The stress of constant proximity can lead to verbal disputes, physical altercations, or bullying. Officers must be vigilant, but monitoring each cell continuously is virtually impossible, heightening the risk of incidents. Health concerns are also amplified in double occupancy cells. Limited air circulation and cramped conditions can accelerate the spread of respiratory infections and other communicable diseases. Sleep deprivation and stress from overcrowding weaken immune responses, making prisoners more susceptible to illness. Mental health support is often insufficient to address the anxiety, depression, and frustration that arise in such conditions. The strain on staff is equally significant. Officers must mediate disputes, enforce rules, and monitor the behavior of two prisoners in spaces intended for one. This demands greater attention, more resources, and often longer hours of supervision. The increased workload can lead to burnout, absenteeism, and reduced morale among staff, which in turn impacts overall prison safety and efficiency. Double occupancy also limits access to rehabilitation and educational programs. When cells are cramped, it is harder for staff to facilitate in-cell learning or personal development activities. Programs that rely on group participation can be affected, as overcrowded living conditions make scheduling and coordination more difficult. Consequently, inmates may miss opportunities for vocational training, educational advancement, or therapeutic interventions. The psychological impact of sharing such limited space cannot be overstated. Prisoners may feel constantly watched or threatened, leading to heightened stress, irritability, and withdrawal. Trust issues can emerge between cellmates, and the inability to have personal space reduces opportunities for reflection or self-regulation, key aspects of rehabilitation that were not originally a priority in Victorian prison design but are crucial today. Finally, the doubling of prisoners in single cells highlights a broader systemic issue within HM Prison Leicester. It underscores the mismatch between the building's historical design and modern incarceration needs. The practice is a coping mechanism rather than a solution, revealing the urgent need for expansion, alternative sentencing policies, or restructured population management to ensure humane and secure conditions for both prisoners and staff. Overcrowding at HM Prison Leicester significantly heightens tension among inmates, creating an environment where conflicts are more likely to arise. When cells and communal areas are packed beyond capacity, prisoners have limited personal space and fewer opportunities to escape from stressful situations. This constant proximity can lead to irritation, resentment, and a greater likelihood of verbal or physical confrontations. The pressure of living in cramped conditions often exacerbates pre-existing behavioral issues. Prisoners who may have struggled with anger management, anxiety, or other mental health challenges outside the prison walls find these problems intensified under crowded circumstances. Even minor disagreements over personal belongings, shower schedules, or noise can escalate into serious altercations due to the inability to retreat to private space. Communal areas such as dining halls, recreation yards, and corridors are particularly prone to conflict in overcrowded prisons. These spaces, designed for a smaller population, become chaotic when too many prisoners are present at once. Mealtime disputes, arguments over gym equipment, or clashes during recreational activities are more frequent, and staff must intervene more often to prevent situations from escalating. Overcrowding also affects prisoner hierarchies and social dynamics. Limited space increases competition for resources such as beds, work assignments, and access to programs. Rivalries between groups or gangs can intensify as inmates feel pressure to assert dominance in confined spaces. In some cases, bullying or intimidation becomes more prevalent, as vulnerable prisoners struggle to protect themselves in the face of crowded conditions. Mental health implications further fuel tension. The stress, anxiety, and frustration associated with overcrowding can lead to emotional outbursts, depression, or aggression. Prisoners may feel constantly surveilled or trapped, and this heightened psychological strain often manifests as conflict with other inmates or even staff. Support services are frequently overstretched, making it difficult to manage these issues proactively. The strain on staff also contributes to tension. Overcrowded conditions mean that officers must supervise more prisoners than they were originally trained to manage in the Victorian-era layout. Reduced staff-to-prisoner ratios make it harder to detect brewing disputes, enforce rules consistently, or maintain calm during high-pressure situations. This can lead to delayed intervention and more serious incidents. Overcrowding can also complicate conflict resolution efforts. Prisoners may have fewer opportunities to participate in counseling, mediation, or restorative justice programs because program spaces are limited or schedules are overloaded. Without access to these interventions, small disagreements are more likely to escalate, reinforcing cycles of violence and tension within the facility. Ultimately, the overcrowding-induced tension at HM Prison Leicester highlights the interplay between structural limitations and human behavior. Victorian-era cells and communal areas were never designed to house the current population, and the resulting strain on personal space, resources, and staff supervision directly contributes to a higher risk of conflict. Managing this tension remains a critical challenge for ensuring safety and stability within the prison. One of the most significant consequences of overcrowding at HM Prison Leicester is the restricted access to education and rehabilitation programs, which are essential for reducing reoffending and preparing inmates for reintegration into society. The prison's Victorian-era design and modern population pressures mean that classrooms, workshops, and training facilities have limited capacity, making it impossible for all prisoners to participate in structured learning or skill-building activities. Educational programs, such as literacy classes, vocational training, and life skills workshops, are vital for inmates who may have had limited opportunities prior to incarceration. However, overcrowding often forces the prison to prioritize a small number of participants, leaving many without access. This creates inequality among prisoners and limits the overall effectiveness of the programs. Those who are unable to attend miss out on critical tools for rehabilitation, including literacy, numeracy, and employable skills. The lack of access to rehabilitation also extends to mental health and counseling services. Programs aimed at addressing substance abuse, anger management, or trauma are heavily impacted by the prison's capacity limits. Overcrowding increases demand for these services, while simultaneously reducing the time and resources available for each prisoner. The result is that inmates in greatest need of support may not receive timely interventions, perpetuating cycles of harmful behavior. Recreational and vocational programs are also affected. Workshops that teach trades such as woodworking, plumbing, or catering require sufficient space, equipment, and staff. Overcrowded conditions limit both the number of participants and the quality of instruction. Inmates who cannot access these programs are deprived of practical skills that could improve employment prospects upon release, undermining one of the main goals of rehabilitation. Scheduling challenges exacerbate the problem. With more prisoners than the facilities were designed to accommodate, organizing classes, work assignments, and therapy sessions becomes a logistical puzzle. Inmates may have to wait weeks or months to participate, delaying progress and reducing motivation. This can lead to frustration, disengagement, and even behavioral issues, which in turn affect overall safety within the prison. The strain on staff is another factor. Educators, counselors, and vocational trainers are often limited in number, and overcrowding stretches their capacity. Instructors may have to teach larger groups than intended or shorten the duration of sessions, diminishing the quality of instruction. Staff burnout and turnover further reduce the effectiveness of educational and rehabilitative initiatives, leaving inmates with fewer opportunities for growth. Access to rehabilitation programs is also critical for reducing reoffending. Evidence shows that education, vocational training, and counseling significantly improve post-release outcomes. Limited participation due to overcrowding means many prisoners leave HM Prison Leicester without the tools to avoid returning to criminal behavior. This perpetuates a cycle of incarceration and contributes to the broader challenges facing the UK prison system. Finally, the combination of overcrowding and limited program access underscores a structural challenge. Victorian-era prisons like HM Prison Leicester were not designed to support modern rehabilitative approaches. While there is an urgent need to provide prisoners with education, skills, and mental health support, the physical constraints and high population density make it difficult to implement these programs effectively, leaving rehabilitation goals unmet. Staff shortages at HM Prison Leicester represent a critical challenge that amplifies the effects of overcrowding and affects every aspect of prison operations. The prison was designed during the Victorian era, when fewer staff members were needed to manage a smaller population. Today, with inmate numbers far exceeding the original capacity, officers are often required to supervise significantly more prisoners than they were trained or scheduled for, creating a constant strain on resources and personnel. The operational impact of staff shortages is immediate and tangible. Routine activities such as cell checks, prisoner movements, meal distribution, and recreational periods become more difficult to manage. With fewer officers on duty, the ability to maintain constant supervision is reduced, and gaps in oversight can allow incidents of violence, bullying, or rule-breaking to occur. This increases the overall risk for both prisoners and staff. Shortages also exacerbate stress and fatigue among existing officers. Those on duty must work longer hours, cover additional shifts, or manage more prisoners per shift than is safe or sustainable. Over time, this can lead to burnout, absenteeism, and reduced morale, which further compounds staffing challenges. Officers under stress may find it harder to respond effectively to conflicts, maintain control, or provide support to prisoners. Security is particularly affected. Fewer staff on the wings means that contraband detection, monitoring of high-risk prisoners, and rapid response to incidents are compromised. This can create opportunities for smuggling, gang activity, and illicit communication between prisoners. In turn, this undermines the overall safety and order of the prison, requiring officers to constantly balance competing priorities under challenging circumstances. Staff shortages also limit the ability to deliver rehabilitative and educational programs. Officers often provide support and supervision for vocational workshops, classroom activities, and therapeutic sessions. When staff are stretched thin, these programs may be delayed, cancelled, or scaled back, reducing prisoners' access to the very initiatives designed to reduce reoffending. Training and professional development are impacted as well. With insufficient personnel, new recruits may not receive the same level of mentoring or supervision as they would in a fully staffed environment. Existing staff may have fewer opportunities to update skills in areas such as conflict management, mental health awareness, and rehabilitation strategies. This can affect the overall competency and confidence of officers. The human impact of staff shortages is reflected in relationships between prisoners and officers. In a fully staffed prison, officers have more time to engage with inmates, build trust, and proactively address behavioral issues. Shortages make these interactions more transactional, with staff focusing primarily on containment rather than guidance or support. This can increase tension, reduce cooperation, and hinder rehabilitative outcomes. Finally, the combination of overcrowding and staff shortages creates a compounding cycle of operational strain. Overcrowding increases the number of prisoners to manage, while insufficient staff reduces the capacity to do so safely and effectively. Without investment in recruitment, retention, and training, this imbalance is likely to persist, posing ongoing challenges for security, rehabilitation, and overall prison management at HM Prison Leicester. Violence has become an increasingly pressing issue at HM Prison Leicester, largely exacerbated by overcrowding, staff shortages, and the limitations of its Victorian-era design. When prisoners are confined in small spaces with limited supervision, tensions rise, creating an environment where disputes can quickly escalate into physical confrontations. Violent incidents not only threaten the safety of inmates, but also place staff in daily danger. The types of violence observed range from inmate-on-inmate assaults to threats, bullying, and intimidation. Gang-related activity, territorial disputes, and personal conflicts are magnified by the lack of space and insufficient staff to monitor interactions. Even minor disagreements can spiral out of control when prisoners feel trapped, frustrated, or unsupported, contributing to a cycle of aggression within the facility. Overcrowding plays a central role in this increase. Cells designed for one are often shared by two, communal areas are crowded, and access to recreational and rehabilitative programs is limited. When personal space is constantly invaded, and prisoners have few outlets for stress relief, emotional strain can manifest as aggression. This increases both the frequency and intensity of violent episodes within the prison. The strain on mental health also contributes to violence. Many prisoners suffer from anxiety, depression, or unresolved trauma, and overcrowding worsens these conditions. Without adequate access to mental health professionals, counseling, or structured activities, frustrations build, and prisoners may act out violently. The combination of psychological stress and environmental pressures makes violence more likely and more unpredictable. Staff shortages intensify the problem. With fewer officers available to supervise wings, monitor interactions, and respond quickly to disturbances, violent incidents can escalate before intervention occurs. This not only endangers the lives of prisoners and staff, but also undermines the overall stability of the prison. Officers may be forced to prioritize certain areas over others, leaving some prisoners vulnerable to attacks or harassment. The prison's Victorian-era infrastructure further complicates violence management. Narrow corridors, small cells, and limited observation points make it difficult to separate inmates during conflicts or monitor high-risk individuals effectively. The building's design was never intended to handle modern security challenges, such as organized gang networks or the smuggling of weapons, which increases the potential for violent outbreaks. Efforts to mitigate violence are ongoing but face systemic barriers. Increased surveillance, segregation units, and incident reporting can help, but the root causes, overcrowding, insufficient staffing, and limited rehabilitative opportunities, remain. Programs aimed at conflict resolution, education, and vocational training can reduce violence over time, but implementation is constrained by the prison's capacity and resources. Finally, the rising concerns about violence at HM Prison Leicester highlight a broader issue within the UK prison system. As historic facilities struggle to cope with modern demands, the risks to both prisoners and staff continue to grow. Addressing these challenges requires a combination of infrastructure upgrades, improved staff recruitment and training, and expanded rehabilitation programs to create a safer, more stable environment. Mental health concerns among inmates at HM Prison Leicester have grown significantly in recent years, influenced by factors such as overcrowding, limited access to services, and the inherent stresses of incarceration. Victorian-era prisons were not designed to address psychological well-being, and the current environment, overpopulated cells, minimal personal space, and strict routines, can intensify existing mental health problems or contribute to the development of new ones. Many prisoners enter the facility already struggling with mental health conditions, including depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, or substance abuse issues. When placed in cramped, high-pressure environments, these conditions often worsen. Inmates may experience feelings of isolation, hopelessness, or heightened irritability, all of which can affect behavior, interactions with others, and overall well-being. Overcrowding further exacerbates mental health challenges. Sharing a cell with another inmate in a space intended for one creates constant stress, reduces privacy, and limits opportunities for rest or personal reflection. Conflicts between cellmates or in communal areas can trigger anxiety or anger, and the constant noise and lack of personal space leave little room for coping or recovery. Limited access to mental health support compounds the problem. While the prison offers some counseling and therapeutic services, staff shortages and high prisoner numbers mean that many inmates cannot access help in a timely manner. Waiting lists for assessment or therapy can be long, leaving vulnerable prisoners without adequate intervention and increasing the risk of self-harm or violent outbursts. The prison environment itself can act as a trigger. Rigid routines, lack of stimulating activities, and minimal social support contribute to feelings of stagnation and frustration. For inmates with pre-existing mental health issues, the combination of stress, inactivity, and overcrowding can accelerate deterioration, leading to crises that require urgent attention from staff who are already stretched thin. Substance misuse is another factor intertwined with mental health. Some inmates use drugs or alcohol to cope with the pressures of prison life, which can exacerbate underlying conditions or provoke new psychological issues. Overcrowded environments make detection and management of substance abuse more challenging, further complicating mental health management within the facility. Mental health issues also intersect with safety and violence concerns. Inmates struggling psychologically are more vulnerable to bullying or victimization, while others may act out aggressively as a result of frustration or emotional instability. This interplay increases risks for both prisoners and staff, creating a cycle where overcrowding, stress, and violence feed into worsening mental health outcomes. Addressing mental health in HM Prison Leicester requires a multifaceted approach. Expanding access to counseling, increasing staff trained in mental health care, and creating safe, structured environments for reflection and support are all critical. Yet, the Victorian-era design and high population density make implementing these solutions challenging, highlighting the urgent need for structural, operational, and policy-level reforms. HM Prison Leicester's aging Victorian-era infrastructure presents significant challenges for maintaining modern security standards. The prison was constructed in the 19th century, long before contemporary security concerns such as organized gang activity, contraband smuggling, or sophisticated escape attempts existed. Thick red brick walls, narrow corridors, and compact cell designs, while robust for their time, are not easily adaptable to current security requirements, creating structural limitations for staff. The layout of the prison, including stacked cell blocks and linear wings, limits visibility and surveillance. Observation points that were once considered sufficient for monitoring a small prisoner population are now inadequate for a modern, overcrowded facility. Officers must navigate narrow corridors and staircases to supervise multiple wings, often with blind spots that can be exploited for illicit activity or escape attempts. This makes proactive security measures more challenging and increases the reliance on staff presence for maintaining order. Old locks, doors, and gates, while historically durable, often require constant maintenance or retrofitting to meet modern safety standards. Mechanical failures or outdated security hardware can compromise control over prisoner movement and limit the prison's ability to respond effectively to incidents. The Victorian construction was never designed to integrate modern technologies such as CCTV, electronic locking systems, or surveillance sensors, which are now standard in contemporary facilities. Shared facilities, such as communal bathrooms, kitchens, and recreational areas, also reflect the limitations of the original design. Overcrowding in these spaces can lead to unmonitored interactions, escalating the risk of violence, contraband exchange, and rule violations. The infrastructure does not provide sufficient space to separate high-risk or vulnerable prisoners, limiting the prison's ability to manage risk effectively. Maintenance of the aging building itself is a constant concern. Red brick walls, timber structures, and outdated plumbing require regular repair, diverting resources from security upgrades. Structural weaknesses, such as deteriorating floors or ceilings, can also create hazards for both prisoners and staff, complicating safety management and adding to operational strain. The historic nature of the prison sometimes restricts modifications. As a building of architectural and historical significance, any major changes or renovations must consider preservation guidelines. This limits the ability to expand wings, reconfigure cell blocks, or install advanced security measures, forcing staff to rely on procedural controls rather than physical upgrades. Technological integration is also challenging. Modern surveillance cameras, alarm systems, and communication networks require infrastructure that can support wiring and monitoring equipment. In a building designed before electricity was standard, retrofitting these systems is complex, expensive, and often disruptive to daily operations. This limits the ability to implement technology-driven security improvements effectively. Ultimately, HM Prison Leicester's aging infrastructure is both a physical and operational constraint. While the building's historical character is significant, its design makes it difficult to adapt to contemporary security demands. Balancing preservation with safety, supervision, and the management of a modern prisoner population is an ongoing challenge that underscores the broader pressures on Victorian-era prisons in the UK. The HM Prison Leicester faces ongoing challenges related to contraband smuggling and the circulation of illicit items within the facility. Overcrowding, staff shortages, and the limitations of its Victorian-era design create vulnerabilities that can be exploited by inmates and external networks. Items such as drugs, mobile phones, weapons, and other prohibited goods present significant risks to security, safety, and overall order in the prison. The prison's compact cell design and narrow corridors make monitoring inmate activity more difficult, providing opportunities for hidden exchanges or the concealment of contraband. Limited observation points, coupled with blind spots in older infrastructure, allow certain items to pass undetected. Prisoners often use ingenuity to circumvent rules, exploiting structural limitations or staff workload pressures to introduce or distribute prohibited items. Overcrowding exacerbates the problem. With more inmates than the facility was designed to accommodate, supervision becomes less effective. Crowded communal areas and shared cells increase opportunities for illicit trading, while officers are forced to divide their attention among a larger population. This reduces the likelihood of detecting contraband before it spreads among the prison population. Staff shortages compound these risks. Fewer officers are available to conduct searches, monitor movement, and respond quickly to intelligence about illicit activity. This stretches security protocols thin, and although staff work diligently to maintain order, gaps in coverage provide openings for smuggling and distribution. The strain on personnel also affects the frequency and thoroughness of routine cell and wing searches. External sources also contribute to contraband challenges. Items are sometimes smuggled into the prison through deliveries, visitors, or even drones. Preventing these methods requires both robust physical security measures and modern technology, such as CCTV, detection systems, and secure delivery procedures, that are difficult to fully integrate into a Victorian-era building without significant adaptation. The presence of contraband fuels additional problems within the prison. Drugs and alcohol can intensify mental health issues, contribute to violence, and strengthen gang influence. Mobile phones facilitate communication with criminal networks outside the prison, potentially undermining law enforcement efforts and introducing additional security threats. Weapons and sharp objects dramatically increase the risk of violent incidents, making daily operations more dangerous for staff and inmates alike. Educational and rehabilitative programs are also affected. When contraband circulates widely, participation in constructive activities becomes riskier, and some prisoners may be coerced or threatened to comply with gang or smuggling demands. This creates an environment where rehabilitation is undermined and conflicts are more likely, further destabilizing the prison environment. Addressing contraband challenges requires a multi-layered approach. Measures include enhanced searches, intelligence-led policing, technological monitoring, staff training, and segregation of high-risk prisoners. However, the physical limitations of HM Prison Leicester's historic design mean that prevention and control must rely heavily on procedural rigor and staff vigilance. The persistence of contraband issues underscores the ongoing tension between maintaining security and managing a facility designed in a very different era. Prison officers at HM Prison Leicester face intense pressure due to the combination of overcrowding, aging infrastructure, and rising security challenges. The Victorian-era design of the prison, with narrow corridors, stacked cell blocks, and limited observation points, means that staff must remain constantly alert, often under physically and mentally demanding conditions. Officers are tasked not only with supervising inmates, but also with managing conflicts, responding to emergencies, and ensuring the facility operates smoothly. Overcrowding significantly increases the workload for prison staff. Cells intended for single occupancy often house multiple inmates, communal areas are congested, and daily routines are more complex to manage. Officers must monitor larger groups of prisoners, mediate disputes, and enforce rules consistently, all while maintaining their own safety. This constant pressure can lead to fatigue, stress, and a heightened risk of burnout among personnel. The prevalence of violence and contraband within the prison further amplifies these pressures. Officers are frequently called upon to intervene in fights, prevent smuggling, or respond to threats. In a facility designed over a century ago, rapid movement between wings and secure observation of all areas is challenging, making staff vigilance essential at all times. The stakes are high, as any lapse in attention can have serious consequences for both prisoners and staff. Mental health demands add another layer of complexity. Inmates experiencing anxiety, depression, or other psychological issues may exhibit unpredictable behavior, requiring officers to apply both restraint and empathy. Supporting prisoners' mental well-being while maintaining security is a delicate balance, and the lack of adequate mental health staffing means officers often shoulder responsibilities beyond their training or capacity. The job's emotional toll is compounded by limited resources. Officers may have to manage multiple high-risk prisoners simultaneously, respond to emergencies with fewer colleagues than ideal, and enforce rules in a population with high levels of frustration and tension. The cumulative stress can lead to physical exhaustion, emotional fatigue, and challenges in decision-making under pressure. Training requirements are also significant. Officers need to be skilled in conflict resolution, crisis management, security protocols, and mental health awareness. In an environment where Victorian-era infrastructure limits visibility and flexibility, staff must constantly adapt their training to real-world conditions. The gap between ideal staffing levels and reality can strain even highly experienced officers. The pressure on officers extends beyond the physical and emotional aspects of the job. They must also navigate administrative duties, such as reporting incidents, monitoring prisoner records, and coordinating with external agencies, all while ensuring day-to-day security. The combination of operational, administrative, and interpersonal responsibilities makes the role highly demanding, with little room for error. Ultimately, the challenging conditions at HM Prison Leicester highlight the resilience and dedication required of prison officers. Despite the historic infrastructure, overcrowded conditions, and evolving security threats, officers continue to maintain order, safety, and a measure of stability within the facility. Their work is critical not only to the operation of the prison, but also to the broader goals of rehabilitation, safety, and justice. Rehabilitation is a central goal in modern criminal justice, and at HM Prison Leicester, it plays a crucial role in reducing reoffending. While the prison was originally designed in the Victorian era for containment and punishment, contemporary approaches emphasize that preparing inmates for reintegration into society is essential to breaking cycles of crime. Rehabilitation programs aim to equip prisoners with education, skills, and support networks that increase their chances of leading law-abiding lives after release. Educational programs are a cornerstone of rehabilitation. Courses in literacy, numeracy, and vocational skills provide inmates with practical tools that improve employability and self-sufficiency. By participating in structured learning, prisoners gain confidence, purpose, and a sense of achievement. These opportunities are especially important for individuals who may have lacked formal education prior to incarceration, addressing gaps that can contribute to criminal behavior. Vocational training also helps reduce recidivism. Workshops in trades such as carpentry, plumbing, catering, or digital skills allow inmates to develop competencies that are transferable to the workforce. Learning a skill not only provides practical benefit, but also instills discipline, patience, and teamwork, qualities that support positive social behavior and reduce the likelihood of reoffending. Mental health and counseling services are another key component. Addressing issues such as trauma, addiction, and anger management is vital for rehabilitation. Prisoners who receive appropriate psychological support are better equipped to cope with challenges outside prison, reducing the likelihood that untreated mental health issues will contribute to further offending. Rehabilitation in this sense is not only about skills, but also about emotional and behavioral transformation. Participation in rehabilitative programs also fosters prosocial relationships. Prisoners engaged in education, work, or therapy often interact constructively with staff and fellow inmates, creating a safer and more cooperative environment. These relationships help break patterns of isolation, mistrust, and aggression, which are common in overcrowded prisons. Positive social experiences inside the prison can translate to healthier interactions after release. The effectiveness of rehabilitation is closely linked to prison conditions. At HM Prison Leicester, overcrowding and limited program access can undermine these efforts. Not all prisoners can attend courses or workshops due to capacity constraints, and high staff workloads limit individualized support. Despite these challenges, rehabilitation remains a priority because it addresses the root causes of criminal behavior rather than just punishing the symptoms. Rehabilitation also has long-term societal benefits. Reducing recidivism decreases crime rates, alleviates pressure on the prison system, and fosters safer communities. Investment in education, vocational training, and mental health programs within prisons like HM Prison Leicester is cost-effective over time, as it lowers the social and financial burden of repeat offending. Ultimately, rehabilitation represents a shift in the philosophy of incarceration. While HM Prison Leicester was built for containment, modern corrections emphasize that prisons should prepare individuals for life beyond their walls. By prioritizing education, skill building, and psychological support, the prison can reduce reoffending, support public safety, and help inmates transition to productive, law-abiding lives after release. Education and vocational training are fundamental tools for reforming prisoners at HM Prison Leicester, providing pathways to personal development and long-term societal reintegration. These programs serve as a bridge between incarceration and productive life outside prison walls, equipping inmates with the knowledge, skills, and confidence necessary to reduce reoffending. In a facility originally designed for containment, such initiatives have become essential for modern rehabilitation strategies. Educational programs within the prison focus on literacy, numeracy, and general knowledge, aiming to fill gaps left by limited schooling before incarceration. Many prisoners enter the system with low educational attainment, which correlates with higher rates of criminal behavior. By offering structured learning opportunities, the prison helps inmates gain practical skills, critical thinking abilities, and a sense of achievement, all of which are vital for reintegration into society. Vocational training programs complement formal education by teaching practical, marketable skills. Workshops in areas such as carpentry, plumbing, catering, and IT provide hands-on experience that can lead to employment after release. Learning a trade not only prepares prisoners for the job market, but also instills discipline, responsibility, and teamwork, values that reduce the likelihood of returning to criminal activities. Participation in these programs has psychological benefits as well. Structured education and training give inmates purpose and routine, which can counteract feelings of boredom, frustration, and isolation common in overcrowded prisons. Engaging in productive work and learning activities helps prisoners build self-esteem, patience, and problem-solving skills, improving mental well-being and reducing the risk of conflict or aggression. Education and vocational training also play a role in promoting positive social behavior. Inmates participating in classes or workshops often develop communication and collaboration skills, learning to work alongside others in a structured environment. These interactions encourage prosocial behavior, conflict resolution, and mutual respect, creating a safer and more cooperative prison community. Overcrowding and limited resources, however, pose significant challenges. With more inmates than the prison was designed to hold, access to classrooms, workshops, and qualified instructors is restricted. Not all prisoners can attend sessions regularly, which reduces the overall impact of these programs. Staff shortages and physical limitations of Victorian-era facilities make scaling and scheduling educational initiatives difficult. Despite these challenges, evidence consistently shows that education and vocational training significantly reduce recidivism. Prisoners who gain skills and qualifications are more likely to find employment, avoid criminal networks, and reintegrate successfully into society. The return on investment extends beyond the individual, benefiting the wider community by decreasing crime rates and easing pressure on the criminal justice system. In the context of HM Prison Leicester, education and vocational training are not just optional programs, they are essential reform tools. By prioritizing these initiatives, the prison moves beyond its historical focus on containment and punishment, offering inmates opportunities for personal growth, skill development, and meaningful preparation for life after incarceration. HM Prison Leicester, with its Victorian-era design and modern population pressures, faces an urgent need for improved funding and infrastructure upgrades. The facility was originally constructed for a fraction of today's inmate numbers, and over the years, overcrowding has exacerbated limitations in cell space, communal areas, and staff facilities. Without adequate investment, the prison struggles to maintain safety, security, and effective rehabilitation programs. Funding shortfalls affect every aspect of prison operations. Maintenance of the aging red brick buildings, repairs to essential systems like plumbing and heating, and upgrades to security hardware require consistent financial support. In the absence of sufficient funding, infrastructure deteriorates, creating risks for both staff and inmates. Cracked walls, outdated locks, and malfunctioning utilities not only hinder daily operations but also compromise safety and well-being. Overcrowding amplifies the strain on infrastructure. Cells meant for one inmate often house two, communal spaces are crowded, and recreational and educational facilities are stretched beyond capacity. Structural modifications, such as expanding wings or adding more cells, are often constrained by the historic nature of the building and require significant investment. Without these upgrades, the prison cannot meet the operational demands of its modern population. Security technology is another area requiring funding. Integrating CCTV systems, electronic locking mechanisms, and alarm systems in a Victorian-era structure is complex and costly. However, these technologies are essential to monitor prisoner activity, detect contraband, and respond quickly to emergencies. Adequate funding would allow the prison to modernize security measures without compromising the integrity of the historic building. Staffing levels are also directly linked to funding. Adequate recruitment, training, and retention of officers depend on budget allocation. Increased funding would allow for higher staff-to-prisoner ratios, better training programs, and support for mental health and welfare initiatives. Staff shortages, caused in part by funding limitations, contribute to operational strain and compromise the prison's ability to maintain order and deliver rehabilitative programs effectively. Funding is essential for rehabilitation programs as well. Education, vocational training, and mental health services require classrooms, workshops, specialized equipment, and trained personnel. Without financial support, these programs cannot be scaled to accommodate the prison population, leaving many inmates without opportunities for personal development and reintegration preparation. Infrastructure upgrades also have broader benefits for safety and well-being. Improvements such as better ventilation, lighting, and sanitation reduce the risk of illness and improve mental health. Renovating communal areas, installing secure recreational spaces, and modernizing utilities all contribute to a safer, more humane environment. These upgrades are particularly critical in a prison with aging Victorian structures that were never designed for contemporary standards of prisoner welfare. Ultimately, improved funding and infrastructure upgrades are essential for HM Prison Leicester to function safely, securely, and effectively. Investment in both the physical building and operational resources would allow the prison to address overcrowding, modernize security, support staff, and deliver meaningful rehabilitation programs. Without such improvements, the facility risks continued deterioration in conditions, safety, and effectiveness, highlighting the need for urgent attention from policymakers and justice authorities. Overcrowding at HM Prison Leicester is not solely a result of its historic design. It is also influenced by national sentencing policies and the management of the criminal justice system. Implementing smarter, evidence-based sentencing policies could play a key role in alleviating population pressure, improving prison conditions, and enhancing rehabilitation outcomes. By reducing unnecessary incarceration and better managing the flow of prisoners, the facility could operate more safely and effectively. One approach involves using alternative sentences for non-violent offenders. Community service, probation, electronic monitoring, or restorative justice programs allow individuals to serve their sentences outside of prison while still fulfilling legal obligations. Such alternatives reduce the number of prisoners entering HM Prison Leicester, freeing up space for those who pose higher risks or require closer supervision, and easing the strain on staff and infrastructure. Early release and parole schemes, when carefully managed, can also reduce overcrowding. Inmates who have served a substantial portion of their sentence and demonstrate low risk of reoffending can be reintegrated into society under supervision. This controlled release strategy creates space within the prison for higher-risk inmates, improves living conditions, and allows resources to be concentrated where they are most needed. Sentencing reform should also address short-term sentences. Inmates serving very short terms often contribute disproportionately to overcrowding, as frequent admissions and releases create a constant churn of the population. Alternatives such as fines, community orders, or suspended sentences for minor offences can limit short-term incarceration, reduce operational disruption, and allow the prison to focus on rehabilitation for longer-term inmates. Diversion programs for individuals with mental health or substance abuse issues are another effective tool. Many offenders cycle through the prison system because underlying issues are not addressed. By directing these individuals to treatment programs, mental health facilities, or addiction services instead of prison, the justice system can reduce repeat incarcerations, relieve overcrowding, and provide more meaningful intervention for those in need. Smarter sentencing policies also encourage investment in rehabilitation rather than simple containment. By reducing the number of prisoners and extending focus on education, training, and counseling, prisons like HM Prison Leicester can operate with safer and more manageable populations. Rehabilitation programs are more effective in less crowded environments, where staff can provide individualized support and inmates have access to structured opportunities. Data-driven approaches are essential for implementing smarter sentencing policies. Analyzing crime trends, recidivism rates, and prison population projections allows policymakers to identify which offences are best suited for alternative sentencing and where resources can be targeted. In the context of HM Prison Leicester, such strategies could reduce overcrowding, improve safety, and enhance long-term outcomes for both inmates and the wider community. Ultimately, smarter sentencing policies recognize that incarceration should be proportionate and purposeful. By prioritizing alternatives for low-risk offenders, addressing underlying causes of crime, and optimizing the use of prison space, policymakers can ease overcrowding at HM Prison Leicester, improve living and working conditions, and create a system that better balances public safety with rehabilitation and fairness. Community support and rehabilitation programs play a critical role in helping inmates at HM Prison Leicester successfully reintegrate into society after release. While incarceration addresses the immediate need for containment and public safety, long-term rehabilitation requires structured support that extends beyond the prison walls. Programs designed to connect prisoners with resources, mentorship, and social networks help reduce recidivism and foster more positive outcomes for both individuals and communities. One major component of post-release support is the provision of housing assistance. Many inmates leave prison without stable accommodation, which can increase the risk of homelessness, social isolation, and reoffending. Community organizations, government housing programs, and partnerships with local charities work to ensure that former prisoners have access to safe, affordable housing, creating a stable foundation for their reintegration. Employment support is another essential aspect. Rehabilitation programs often provide training, job placement assistance, and vocational guidance to help ex-prisoners secure legitimate work. By equipping individuals with employable skills and helping them navigate the job market, these programs reduce financial pressures and the temptation to return to criminal activity. Vocational training completed inside HM Prison Leicester can be matched with community employment initiatives, creating continuity in skill application. Mental health and substance abuse services remain critical after release. Community-based counseling, therapy, and addiction support help former inmates address issues that contributed to their initial offending. Such programs complement in-prison interventions and provide continuity of care, ensuring that the progress made inside HM Prison Leicester is not lost once an inmate returns to the outside world. Mentorship and peer support programs are also highly effective. Connecting ex-prisoners with individuals who have successfully reintegrated provides guidance, encouragement, and practical advice for navigating societal challenges. Mentors can help former inmates develop coping strategies, access community resources, and build a sense of belonging, which is vital for long-term rehabilitation. Family and social networks play a key role in reintegration as well. Programs that maintain or rebuild family connections during incarceration or provide support for positive community engagement, help reduce isolation and encourage prosocial behavior. Inmates with strong support systems are more likely to stay away from crime and engage productively in society. Education and lifelong learning continue beyond release. Many community programs offer opportunities to complete certifications, vocational courses, or higher education, helping former prisoners advance personally and professionally. These opportunities not only enhance employability, but also instill a sense of achievement and purpose, which strengthens resilience against returning to criminal behavior. Ultimately, community support and rehabilitation programs recognize that effective correction extends beyond prison walls. At HM Prison Leicester, integrating these programs with in-prison education, vocational training, and mental health services creates a continuum of support that maximizes the chances of successful reintegration. By fostering connections, skills, and resilience, these programs reduce recidivism, improve public safety, and allow former inmates to contribute positively to society. Balancing security with humane treatment is a constant and complex challenge at HM Prison Leicester. The facility's Victorian-era design, originally intended for strict containment, makes it difficult to provide modern standards of prisoner welfare while maintaining the safety of both inmates and staff. Officers must enforce rules, prevent escapes, and manage conflicts, all while ensuring that prisoners' basic human rights are respected, a task that requires vigilance, judgment, and sensitivity. Security concerns are heightened by overcrowding. Cells meant for single occupancy often house 2 prisoners, communal areas are congested, and the risk of violence and contraband increases. Officers must focus heavily on monitoring and control, which can limit opportunities for prisoners to engage in rehabilitative activities, recreation, or personal reflection. The need to prevent incidents often takes priority over the provision of comforts or services that promote well-being. Despite these pressures, humane treatment is essential. Prisoners are entitled to adequate living conditions, access to medical care, nutritious food, mental health support, and opportunities for education and skill development. Providing these services in an overcrowded aging facility is a logistical and operational challenge, requiring careful resource allocation and creative problem-solving by staff. Programs that promote rehabilitation, education, and mental health support are vital components of humane treatment. However, overcrowding and staff shortages make consistent access difficult. Officers must balance the enforcement of security protocols with the facilitation of these programs, ensuring that inmates are treated fairly and respectfully while maintaining order and safety. The prison's infrastructure also complicates the balance. Narrow corridors, small cells, and limited observation points restrict movement and surveillance. Segregation or isolation may be necessary for security, but overuse can harm mental health and well-being. Officers must make judgment calls about when to enforce strict control and when to allow flexibility, often under conditions of high stress and limited support. Staff training plays a critical role in managing this balance. Officers need to be equipped with skills in conflict resolution, mental health awareness, and crisis management. A well-trained workforce can enforce rules without escalating tensions unnecessarily, and can intervene in ways that minimize harm to prisoners, supporting both security and humane treatment simultaneously. Mental health issues further complicate this balance. Inmates experiencing anxiety, depression, or trauma require careful handling to avoid incidents that could compromise safety. Providing adequate psychological support while maintaining security requires collaboration between officers, mental health professionals, and administrative staff, highlighting the need for integrated strategies and sufficient resources. Ultimately, balancing security with humane treatment at HM Prison Leicester requires ongoing attention, adaptability, and investment. Officers, administrators, and policymakers must navigate the tension between containment and care, ensuring that prisoners are kept safe and secure while receiving the basic rights and rehabilitative opportunities necessary for dignity and long-term reintegration. Future reforms and modernisation efforts are essential to address the long-standing challenges at HM Prison Leicester. The prison, with its Victorian-era design and decades of accumulated operational strain, struggles to meet the needs of a modern correctional system. Without systemic reform, issues such as overcrowding, security vulnerabilities, limited rehabilitation opportunities, and staff pressures will continue to undermine both safety and effectiveness. Infrastructure modernization is a primary focus of reform. Victorian-era cells, narrow corridors, and outdated facilities limit the prison's ability to implement contemporary security measures or accommodate rehabilitation programs. Upgrading or expanding cell blocks, installing modern surveillance systems, and improving utilities such as heating, plumbing, and ventilation would create a safer, more functional environment for both inmates and staff. Such upgrades would also allow the prison to handle population pressures more effectively. Reforms must also address staffing levels and training. Modern correctional practices require officers to balance security, rehabilitation, and humane treatment simultaneously. Recruiting and retaining sufficient staff, providing advanced training in conflict management, mental health, and rehabilitative approaches, and improving working conditions are essential steps toward reducing operational strain and ensuring consistent, effective supervision. Overcrowding can be alleviated through both infrastructure expansion and policy changes. Smarter sentencing policies, alternative sanctions for non-violent offenders, and improved parole systems can reduce the influx of prisoners, creating space for those who require higher security or rehabilitative support. Combining physical modernization with systemic policy reforms ensures that reforms are sustainable, rather than merely temporary fixes. Enhancing rehabilitative and educational programs is another key component. Modernization should include expanded classrooms, vocational workshops, and therapeutic spaces to provide prisoners with the skills and support they need to reintegrate successfully. Integrating technology, such as e-learning platforms and vocational simulations, can increase program capacity and accessibility even in space-limited conditions. Health and mental health services are critical areas for modernization. Expanding access to counseling, substance abuse treatment, and medical care within upgraded facilities ensures that prisoner well-being is prioritized alongside security. Modern designs that incorporate quiet spaces, recreational areas, and improved ventilation contribute to mental health, reducing the risk of conflict and self-harm. Technology integration is essential for both safety and efficiency. CCTV, electronic locking systems, biometric access controls, and communication networks improve monitoring, reduce opportunities for contraband, and allow staff to respond more effectively to incidents. Implementing these technologies within the constraints of a historic building requires careful planning and investment, but is necessary to meet modern security standards. Finally, future reforms must focus on long-term sustainability and adaptability. The prison system must evolve in response to demographic changes, crime trends, and rehabilitation research. At HM Prison Leicester, modernization efforts that combine infrastructure upgrades, staff investment, policy reform, and program expansion will create a facility capable of balancing safety, humane treatment, and effective rehabilitation, setting a model for other historic prisons in the UK.